Alright, let's look at those VU meters again. I love VU meters. I really do. And I love this amp. This is my Yamaha Natural Sound Integrated Amplifier, model number A-S1100. And that's going to be the focus of a series of videos on this amplifier. I'm going to do a bit of a review, but mostly it's going to be on technical matters. I'm going to get into how unique this amp really is. And by the way, this is a new amp. I purchased it about 6 months ago. Yamaha, despite its classic looks, this is currently being sold by Yamaha, and it's an outstanding amplifier. Well worth every penny. I am mating it with my Klipsch Forte 3s. And I'm currently, I sometimes use my project turntable through a tube RIAA preamp, although the Yamaha has a built-in phono preamp. Right now I'm listening to digital through my TAC NT503. That's pretty much my system right now. And it's one of the finest systems I've ever put together in terms of sound quality. I've had lots and lots of stuff over the years. I've had, when it comes to amps, speakers too, but when it comes to amps, I've had some really fine Lin equipment. I've had Adcom and Harman Kardon and so many I can't even remember. I've flipped components left and right. But honestly, I don't think I've ever had a system, an overall system, speakers, amp, particularly the speaker amp combination, that I find more enjoyable than the one I have right now, the one I just described. And you know, again, these speakers are amazing. These Fortes are just phenomenal. But this amp is just incredible. And so what I'm going to do is I want to tell you a little bit about this. Let me first of all, I'll do a quick review, because really the focus is going to be on how unique this amp really is. It really stands apart from just about everything else that's on the market now. And I'll start by saying this. I really believe that there's a family of amps that Yamaha makes, the or the A-S family. There's different models, but when you get up to the A-S models that have, and I don't remember all the model numbers, the ones that have the VU meters, they have some unique amplifier circuitry in them. They're not just your standard Class AB. Okay, they're not digital amps, they're not switching amps, and they're not Class AB either, or Class A. They don't use a traditional style of amplifier at all. And it's really cool what they do. They call it a floating balance design, and I want to get into that because that's really interesting. And I'm fascinated by it because of the end result. Okay, if when I first auditioned this amp, if I didn't like the sound quality, or I just thought it was ordinary, or or pedestrian, I wouldn't even care. about how it's designed, but because it sounds so incredible, might be the best amp I've ever heard. All in all, because it sounds so incredible, I was interested to find out perhaps why. You know, what makes it tick. And I will say this about the sound quality, and I'm not going to get into much of that because that's really an individual thing. But definitely hear one for yourself if you can. By the way, new, this amp is somewhere in the range of, I forget exactly, 23 or 2600, 2600 or 2300, I forget, something like that. So it's not cheap, but I really believe that it can hold its own against just about any amp at any price. I think it's incredible, and I think it's a modern day classic. I think that one day, long from now, when these are out of production, these things are going to be ones that people are seeking to find. They're that good. I'm surprised that Yamaha is still making something this good, to be honest with you, but they are. Maybe not for long, but they are now, and these things are really something. But one note about the sound. Let me sit down here. Is that the best way I can describe it is, and I've popped in a couple other amplifiers to listen to through the Klipsch Forte 3s, and every time I get back to the Yamaha, I'm just stunned. You know, you listen to the other amplifiers for a day or two and you go, oh, everything sounds great, sounds good. And you put the Yamaha back in and wow. You just feel like you're listening to another level, another plane of excellence. It's just amazing. The best way I can describe it, first of all, everything from the highs to the mids to the lows are reproduced in perfect proportion. I mean, nothing is accentuated. It's just perfect. And in terms of the bass, it's the best of the transistor world. I mean, solid, controlled, tight, accurate, perfectly balanced. The mids and the highs, I would say, give you what I consider to be the best of vacuum tubes. And that's really strange to say, and that's something that it's an analogy that sometimes people use, but I don't use it lightly. The mid-ranges are just phenomenal. The mid-range frequencies, the voices, perfect. Kind of, and it's kind of tube-like in its warmth and velvety, but even better. Vacuum tubes have their limitations. They have a sound to them. But this is even better. And of course the high frequencies, right on par, just perfect. Just accuracy, but it blends it all together. You know, it blends the frequency spectrum together in a coherent way that I've just never, ever heard, regardless of the amplifier. So I've substituted in a few other amps, and the Yamaha blows them away. One of them is that one down there at the very bottom. It's an older Harman Kardon, but not really a fair comparison. But that Harman Kardon has been with me for a long time, and I just have it around. It's just, you know, it never dies, and it's always been a satisfying, you know, decent, good amp. But it just doesn't hold a candle to the Yamaha. And I've tried my little, I've used my little 300B Class A tube amp in the circuit, because these Klipsch are incredibly efficient, and you can get pretty, despite that only being 8 watts a channel, you can get plenty of sound out of these Klipsch. Anyway, in comparison to the tube amp, Yamaha blows it away, and that tube amp sounds really good too. Really sweet. Yamaha blows it away in every department. So I could go on and on, but I'm not really an audio reviewer. I don't know all the buzzwords and all the terms and all that sort of thing. I can just tell you how much I love it. Enough said about that. But why? You know, I was curious. Why does it sound so? What is it that makes an amp sound so good? And there's a lot of theories about that. Of course, the type of amp it is, the topology of the amp. You know, is it a Class A? Is it a Class AB? Is it, you know, what components does it have in the signal path? And there's so many different things. That, well, I thought, okay, what is it that Yamaha's doing here that sets them apart? They're doing something right. And so I found the schematic for this thing, and I dug through it, spent a lot of time digging through it. I compared it to what they allege on their website about this amp, and I'm going to get into that. And I'm going to tell you about how this thing works. First thing I'm going to do is actually, well, let me just give you a brief summary of what the other videos in this series are going to be about, and then I'll start the process. And I'm going to pull this amp out of the loop here, put it on my bench, and I'll show you the back panel, all the connections, and I'll show you the features of it. Then I'll get into the interesting aspects of the amp topology and how it works on a relatively non-technical level. I'll get slightly technical, but I'm going to try to keep it to the point where almost anyone can kind of follow what I'm saying. I think you'll really find this extremely interesting. And then I'm to pull this amp, pull the top panel off, and we're going to get a look at the inside, how it's constructed. And then, if things go right, I'm going to actually take some measurements off the amp. I might do, I believe it's, I can do THD, and I don't know, I could do peak power, but this amp is fine. I don't need to worry about that. I'm interested to find out how much Class A, how much these output transistors are biased into Class A, because I would swear, just listening to it, that it's a Class A output stage, or at least what I'm listening to, because these speakers are so efficient that I've never seen those VU meters go above 1 watt. Okay, let me just give you an example. And normally an amp like this will, any amp, Class ABs or this unique style of amp that I'm going to tell you about, if it's Class AB, you get a little bit of Class A, and then after a watt or two, it switches over to Class B. But let me show you. I want to turn the VU meters. So right now the VU meters are on peak. I'm going to turn them to the regular VU so that they're measuring wattage. And I'm going to turn this up to a fairly loud listening level. That's loud. Look at that. I barely got up to 1/10 of a watt, and that was pretty loud. That's how efficient these speakers are. So I suspect I turned that too loud. I can't talk now. I suspect that the majority of my listening, this amp is in Class A. If it's a Class AB amp, which I'm not sure of yet, I can't tell by the schematic. Probably is Class AB, but I think that I'm driving these speakers mostly when the amp is in its Class A mode, which might explain. And that's another benefit of very efficient speakers. Even if you have a standard Class AB amplifier and you have really efficient speakers, you're going to be listening to, you know, most reasonable levels. That amp is going to be in Class A. If you have horrendously inefficient speakers where you've got to pump 10 watts or more in there just to get a reasonable listening level, then your amp is into Class AB already. Class AB is less desirable than Class A, by the way. You can look that up on the web. Class AB just chops the signal in half and introduces crossover distortion, and all that has to be corrected by negative feedback and biasing and other measures. Class A, the output transistors are conducting 180 degrees of the cycle, and it's much more pure, and which might help to explain why many people desire Class A amplifiers, but they're usually big, heavy, bulky, and they produce a lot of heat. And they're not very green, but I don't give a shit about that. Okay, so again, I don't have a script, so I'm just off the top of my head here. Let me, before I pull this off and put it on the bench, let's go take a look to summarize part one of this video. Let's go take a look at, I really should have a tripod here. I don't feel like cutting. Let's just briefly take a look at what Yamaha has to say about this amp. Okay, so first of all, they call it a floating and balanced power amplifier. What does that mean? I'm going to explain. And it uses MOSFETs. The output transistors are MOSFETs, which is a type of transistor, and I'm going to get into that in a little bit. And it happens to be a type of transistor that mimics, as close as you can get in the transistor world, it mimics a vacuum tube. It mimics a pentode, a vacuum tube. Another feature, all-stage fully discrete configuration. Well, what fully discrete means is that in the signal path there are no op amps. Op amps are evil in high-end audio. So everything is designed around discrete transistors. Large capacity power supply, that's good. Symmetrical design, I'll explain what that means. The volume control is it doesn't use a standard potentiometer that, as we all know, degrade over time and produce noise. So it uses an electronic potentiometer. That's fine, that's good. Low impedance, fully discrete phono amp, although I'm using my tube phono amp. VU meters. Elegant design with it is really nice. This thing is just really exudes high quality throughout. It's got those nice wood panels on the sides. Beautiful. The thing is nearly 50 pounds too. It's really something. The specs. Now, specs can't tell you a whole lot about how an amp is going to sound. I place no emphasis on this, but the maximum power into 4 ohms when we reach 0.7% THD, 1% is usually the threshold, is 160 watts. That's a lot of power. This thing can really pump it out. Damping factor 250. That's the ability of an amp to control your speakers, and that's a good damping factor. That's excellent. Frequency response 5 hertz to 100 kilohertz, way more than we need, right? THD 0.025%. That doesn't really tell us much. Once THDs get below about 1%, it's not going to tell you a whole hell of a lot about how an amp sounds. You can have amps you can be listening to 1% THD, and the amp might sound fantastic, and you get some, cold, hard, cold as steel transistor amplifier with THD of 0.000 whatever, and it might sound like crap. That doesn't tell you a whole lot. Signal noise ratio good. Weight 51 pounds. Okay. Now, let's see what else I have here. Hold on a second. This is, by the way, this is all from Yamaha's website. They have this thing called a floating and balanced power amplifier, and I'm really going to get into detail about that. That's really going to be the emphasis of an entire video. It's really interesting. But what they say is that it's a balanced amplifier. It's floating, meaning it's nothing is referenced to ground potential. They say it's developed by Yamaha, but I can tell you from experience, this circuit design has been around a long time. It's, you know, there's nothing that they did here that's out of the, you know, no one, and I'm going to get into this, but this floating balance concept here, very rare in commercial amplifiers these days. You hardly ever see it. In fact, I can't tell you if any other company does this. I don't think they do. They're unique in that sense. However, the basic design that's been around is the design is what's been referred to as a circlotron. How do you spell that? C-I-R-C-L-O-T-R-O-N. It's been around a long time. It was first developed for vacuum tube amps, and it can be made with transistors too. That's what they're doing here. They just don't use the word circlotron, but that's exactly what they're doing. So they say they developed it. That's bullshit. They didn't develop anything. They improved it maybe. Separate negative feedbacks, nothing unusual there. Completely floating, entire power amp circuit from the ground is removed from the ground. Removes any negative impact of minute voltage fluctuations from the ground. Moreover, the outputs comprise MOSFETs. MOSFETs are great, by the way, which provide a warm and natural sonic characteristic. Well, I can tell you that's absolutely true. It's amazing in this amp. The use of MOSFETs, which have the same polarity on both sides, okay, they're not using, I'm going to get into this, but they are using for both the push and the pull sides of the amp, they're using the same MOSFET of the same polarity, which is absolutely good. Further evolves the ideal symmetrical design to eliminate sound variations due to differences in polarity, The result is a sound with superior signal to noise ratio and well-defined whatever, sound fields, whatever that means. Well, I can tell you that's true. This amp is noise free. You can put your ear up to the speaker when there's no music on and hear nothing. It is noise, no hum, no buzz, no noise. It is silent, and the sound, again, fantastic, unbelievable. So here's their floating balance design. This is directly from the Yamaha website. I have fully traced this out on the schematic diagram, and I'll get into that in a little bit. And what they show here is absolutely 100% correct. This is what they're doing, and I'm going to get into this later, how this works and how they've implemented it. But this is all 100% correct and true based on the schematic diagram. It took me a long time to trace that diagram. When I first looked at the schematic, my head was spinning because it doesn't look like any amplifier that I've ever seen on a schematic. It's not a typical Class A or Class AB. It's not a typical layout. It is weird, but I figured it out. They say all stage fully discrete, okay, meaning no op amps. Well, that's true, unless you use the tone controls. Once you turn the tone controls from their neutral position, you'll hear a little click, and that's a relay, and it diverts the signal to an op amp, and they use op amps for tone controls. But it's a really cool way of doing it, and this is a diagram of it, because when you're not using the tone controls, when you're not using the tone controls, then the signal path bypasses the op amps altogether, and you get a straight, you continue on with a fully discrete signal path. If you pop in a tone control, you'll hear a little click of a relay, and it sends, for example, the treble, or I was using the bass there, sends the bass through an op amp filter, and it mixes it back out. That switch pops up there. So you do go through op amps when you use the tone control. But when you're not using them, bypasses everything, and you're back to a fully discrete signal path. Okay, now here's we get into the schematics. I'm not going to get into that in this video. I'm going to make that for part 2 or part 3 when I get into the basic design of the amp, of this, what they call floating balanced design, which is a circlotron amp. Got some other material here I'm going to cover too, and on the technical side of things. But let's go back out. All right, so cover the front panel now, and then when I take this off and put it on the bench, we'll cover the rear panel. But basically, it's real simple. Classic design, classic styling. This is a brushed aluminum faceplate. It's hard to see, but there's the wood panels on the side. Awesome, beautiful, glossy. Built like a tank. I mean, it's just really, really solid, heavy as hell. So you got your power switch. Does have a remote control, which I don't have next to me right now, but I guess that's the I for the remote control right there. Does have its own fully discrete headphone amplifiers built in, no op amps there. You have a speaker selector. Okay, you can speakers A, B, or A plus B. The VU meter, okay, has an adjustment. You can either turn it off if you don't want the light or the glow at nighttime. You can turn it to peak, and when it's on peak, the VUs will just bob up and down with the peaks of the music. That's just basically for show. Or when you turn it to VU, you get an accurate readout of the wattage on the output relative to 8-ohm speakers. Now, listen to the click. I'm going to turn on you'll hear a click when I turn the bass. See it? Now it diverts to the op amp. Click and back, bypass. Same for treble. Click, back. That click is a relay. It's got a balance. And your input selector for main direct. There's a preamp input basically to this. This amp has preamp outputs and an amplifier input, I should say, not a preamp. Okay, this has preamp outputs, so you can drive a separate amplifier, in which case you would probably turn the speakers off. And it has preamp inputs if you want to use another preamp, such as a tube preamp or whatever. You hook it into main direct, and then that takes that signal directly into the amplifier and bypasses all the preamp circuitry. Line 1, line 2, you have a CD, tuner, all those are the same line level inputs basically. And then you have a phono, where you have a fully discrete phono preamp built in. Let's get some music here, and you have a mute right here, which mechanically turns the motorized driven volume knob down, back up. Alright, so that's pretty much covers the front panel. I'm going to call it quits for part 1, and pull this off, put it on the bench. We'll look at the rear panel, then cover some theory, which I find really interesting, the unique qualities of the amp. And then we'll pull the cover off and look at what's inside. We'll pull the top cover off, see what's inside. And I figured out on the schematic a way to take a measurement to see how much Class A wattage is being dissipated before the amp switches over to Class B. And I'm not exactly sure if it's going to work, but I'm going to give it a try. That's probably going to be on my last video, just out of curiosity. So anyway, that's that. End of part 1. Again, if you haven't heard this amp, or if you're in the market for one, I couldn't recommend it more. And that's based on, I don't know how many amps I've owned in my life. I started this hobby in the early 80s, so go figure. I don't think I've ever had one that's more musically satisfying. And I love the classic look, and the build quality is phenomenal. It's a Yamaha, so I'm pretty confident it's going to be extremely reliable. Not worried about that, but couldn't recommend it enough. It's just incredible. If you do, say one more thing, if you do decide to go look at these, Yamaha has a whole bunch of these amps and these integrated amps in their product line. Like I say, I think, and I'm not exactly sure, but you want to make sure, because some of the lower price ones are just a standard Class A, B, and I can't attest to how those sound. I'm sure they're okay, but you want to make sure when you get on the website that the amp that you're looking at has this floating balanced configuration, because that's what I'm basically reviewing here. Their lower cost ones, I don't believe, have this topology. They have a standard Class A-B topology. So, but the AS1100 is what I have. And by the way, I think there's an AS2000 or 2100 or something like that. And the only difference between that one and this one is that one has balanced inputs. This one doesn't have balanced inputs. But there's little difference that I could see at all other than that. I probably should have bought the one with balanced inputs, because my DAC has balanced outputs, and that's a whole discussion about whether you use balanced inputs or not. I don't know. I never was a fan of, how do I put it? I never fully appreciated the merits of using balanced lines other than noise reduction. But in terms of sound quality, whether it's balanced or unbalanced, once you enter this amplifier, everything becomes balanced anyway. So the only real difference between balanced and unbalanced inputs really gets down to when you connect components. If you have balanced lines, balanced connectors, they're gonna be more immune to noise, environmental noise. But that's about it. So I didn't buy the one with balance, but and there's a much more expensive model that's like very similar to this with larger VU meters. I don't remember the number, but it's like $6,000 some, but it has the same amp. I've looked at it. The built-in amp is the same. Okay, it might use different MOSFETs on the output. It produces a little bit more power, but hell, this is 160 watts a channel. I mean, what else do you want? I found the AS1100 for the price to be the best bargain in the lineup, and the AS2000 or whatever it is with the balance, I think that's another $800-900, something like that. I don't know what it was, but it was more, and it just wasn't worth it to me. So anyway, enough of that. We'll get into more of the details later in the second part of the vid, and like all of my vids, I don't make these videos for people with attention deficit disorder. I don't have a script really. I just print out a bunch of stuff and I talk about it as it comes to me. So a little bit disorganized, but it's just the way I do things. Don't really have time to put together one of these really ultra professional videos that I watch on YouTube. That I have a lot of respect for those guys. I just don't have that kind of time. So unless I kind of do it hodgepodge, I won't get it done at all. So anyway, thanks for watching, and be looking for parts 2 and 3 and so forth, and we'll get into the details. Really interesting stuff, and hope you enjoy it. Ciao.